We're good to go.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So just hello and welcome to our new cycle. I'm just going to start with this preamble because we might have people who are joining us who are new to this. So hello and welcome to our new cycle of Sea Conversations. And Sea Conversations is an initiative of Sea City along with the Urban Center Mumbai, and it is to create a platform for cultural discourse. The conversations are currently in their 10th year, just like the school. And we've had more than 140 talks with speakers from various disciplines, architects, of course, but also artists and scholars and many, many kinds of practitioners. And it used to almost be held always on the sea premises. And even now we try to have as many talks as possible on home turf because it allows for the school to become this node in the neighborhood, produce a community. But ever since the pandemic, we found that online conversation just allows us to invite many more people and reach many, many more people. And it's now indispensable to us. In fact, we've tried to get Rohini to come to Mumbai as well, but it hasn't worked out this time. And it's a new academic year for us. We started school in the first week of June, and this is the very first talk of the cycle, and it's titled Drawing Worlds. And the concern for this series is with the question of drawing, and it's one that the college holds very, very important. And the pedagogy of the school is constantly trying to wrest new meanings and new forms and new ways for all of us, really, students, teachers, practitioners at all stages, to consider the act as well as the object of drawing, specifically because it seems to be so limited when it comes to the discipline of architecture. And these limitations often establish themselves as constraints in spatial imagination. And this series hopes to open up, by looking at drawing practices closely, how many kinds of many kinds of seeing engender new forms of imagination that, reorient you and open possibilities to consider our world and therefore our spaces anew. And this series will span 7 talks and host conversations with different practitioners who are all artists and scholars with independent practices. And I'm so glad to have Rohini Devasher join us for our very first talk. She is an artist and an amateur astronomer, and she has this prolific bio, which I won't be able to read out in its entirety. But among other galleries, her work has been shown at the Minnesota Street Project Foundation in San Francisco, Gallery Wendy Norris, the Sea Art Festival in Busan, the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, among others. And also something really wonderful to note is that she's the first Indian artist to be honored by Deutsche Bank as Artist of the Year for 24-25. And in last year, 23, she was a dual resident in arts at CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research in Geneva, and at the International Center for Theoretical Sciences in Bengaluru in India. So just before we start the talk, I'm going to invite Rohini to speak now. I will rejoin you once the work has been presented, and I invite anyone with questions to type them in the chat box and we can discuss them afterwards. So thank you so much, Rohini, and over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. That was a lovely, lovely introduction. So just briefly before I start presenting, I wanted to thank everybody at SEA, at the School of Environment and Architecture, specifically Apurva and Rupali, for inviting me to contribute and to speak. And I'm really thrilled to be here because I haven't actually been asked to speak about drawing ever, actually. So it's been a really interesting exercise to sort of look through the work and put this together. So I'll just start sharing my screen. And yeah, please, I hope that there are questions at the end because it would be great to get feedback. So hopefully everybody can see this and all is good. If you can give me a thumbs up.
Yeah, we can okay, see you. And the awesome. Work, yes.
Okay, so as Apurva so kindly introduced me already, I am an artist and amateur astronomer. And the reason I do sort of the introduction includes both, hopefully will be made clear over the course of the conversation. But just to basically tell you that my work looks at the role of observation, the observer, and the field or the site, which is why, the idea was to also talk about drawings from the field. And I like the way Apurva sort of laid the ground, because the field in my case is many different things. So actually the drawings do come from fields of many different kinds. But each of these categories, so the idea of observation, the observer, the field, or the site, each of these entails a multiplicity of complex practices of both looking. So how is attention focused? What is looked at? How is it looked at? And why? and of seeing. So ways of describing, sorting, collecting, mapping, measuring. And one of the things that obviously I think I have discovered at least is that no observation is ever truly unmediated. And my work is interested in thinking about the people, the sites, the forms, and the modes of interaction that this mediation takes. Right. And at the core of this is also a recognition of the entanglement of relationships in the natural world, human, non-human, nature, culture, perception, production. Very briefly, to give you a little bit of a background, I've trained as a, ooh, 1 second, sorry, making sure. Yes, I've trained as a painter and a printmaker, but drawing has always been a huge, huge part of that practice. And it has taken many, many forms over the years. And it is now part of this sort of hybrid practice, I would say, which includes video, which includes prints. And I'm showing you this stuff for a reason, which we'll come to. But basically, the thing is that I'm going to begin actually by sharing work that I haven't talked about for a very long time. So between 2004 and 2012, I did a series of these sort of large wall drawings, which were all site specific, and they all explored space and architecture in different ways. The images and the forms that form the content of these bodies of drawings were actually what you're looking at on the screen, in the sense that I have a collection at home behind me in the drawers of things that I've collected all over the place, right? So there are insects, there are seeds, there are plants, there are all these kinds of things that I collect. And you begin in my MA or in my BFA with sketching them in sketchbooks and things like this. And I was always interested in the kind of specific patterning that was shown in many of these. So coming to the first of the wall drawings, this was in 2004 at the conclusion of my MFA, which was in printmaking. And one of the things that I really was excited about by printmaking. So for those of you who may or may not have experience with printmaking, the idea is that you have a kind of a surface, which is a plate, and then you have the image, right, which is the paper. The plate can be of metal, it can be of stone, it can be of silk, like with screen printing. And the traditional, at least the way that I was taught in the College of Art in Delhi, was that you would produce perfect editions, the idea that each print is perfectly similar to the next. But what I found that very challenging, because I'm not very good when it comes to repeating exactly the same thing. But what I did find exciting in the MA was how you could then take a plate and then produce kind of a chaotic sort of patterning, which can also sort of reveal pattern after chaos. You know what I mean? So there is a point where pattern, if you keep repeating it, it starts to dissolve into complete chaos. But then after a moment, somehow, pattern seems to emerge again. So this drawing was the first in an attempt to kind of take this on a larger scale. So I did this on site over about 3 months. I built the wall and I worked on the wall drawing. And so this one was 2012, which is at the end of that sort of, period where I was looking at these big architectural drawings. And you've noticed that, there is this kind of curve in the wall, which I found is a really interesting kind of way to think about the ways in which architecture can impact the vision or the way that you respond to a drawing in space. And one of the things that has been interesting for me in all of these is this idea of a non-passive nature, or a nature that looks back at you. There is an artist, a British artist, I think his name is Paul Morrison, and he's done a lot of very interesting work on the idea of cognizant landscapes, or landscapes that look back. So the idea is that these are somehow deliberately stark and unsettling. They seem to be both, seductive. They are also threatening. And the interesting thing with a curved wall, sorry, go back to this thing, is that when you're standing in front of these walls, and some of them are very large, usually, I think this one, if I'm not wrong, and I can't remember the size now, but the idea is that when you stand in front of it, you can't quite take in the entire breadth of the drawing, but then you have this kind of sense of a kind of vibration almost, or like a dissonance on the edges of your peripheral vision, so there is a sense of being destabilized, which I like. I like that feeling that is created, because it sort of also feeds into the drawing. Also, I like to leave, if I'm allowed. I'm not always allowed, but when I'm allowed, I like to leave whatever I draw with there, So on one hand, it sort of someone told me that it creates a sense of anxiety, because people feel like maybe it's still a work in progress, which I think is very interesting. But also, my experience is like when I've shown this work, and if people come up close enough, then they can also track the work back with them, And this idea of sort of contamination or proliferation is something that is quite interesting. So we're going to switch frames a little bit and shift to fields of a different kind. So this is the first time I think I started to think about drawings as more than just a drawing, if you know what I mean. I mean, yes, that the drawings before this were architectural, But this is an image of a work that was part of my solo at the Bhauraji Lad Museum in 2016. And the whole show was thinking about the idea of deep time. So astronomical time, geological time, basically sciences which think about time scales that are so gargantuan that they require huge feats of imagination on the part of what it is, of us, of humans, but also that it requires us to work on the backs of people who have been working in the deep past, but also in the service of astronomers, let's say, or geologists of the deep future. So here, what happened is that the Bhauraji Lad also seemed to become a kind of field, So I was interested in the fact of its history, of course. So the Bhauraji Lad used to be the government central museum, and the BDL still holds in its collection a huge reserve collection of corals, fossils, minerals that date back to the Silurian, to the Cretaceous, to the Jurassic. So I was interested in thinking about the whole space as kind of, the whole room was deep time. But the drawing, I think, at least in the documentation, I tried to find a way to have the drawing speak to the corals. But in terms of the actual form of the drawing that you're looking at, I was really interested in the ways in which geologists and paleontologists represent geological time. And this is vertically, usually. So vertical, which I think is really interesting. And it's sort of different from the way that one is used to thinking about timelines, which tend to be horizontal. So this vertical perspective of time is based on the law of superposition, which is an axiom that is common to all sciences that deal with strata, layers, or stratification and layering, right? So in its plainest form, it says, this law of superposition says that in undeformed stratigraphic sequences, the oldest layer will be at the bottom of the sequence. So in other words, you go down and you go deeper into the past, right? So the further down you go, the further back in time you're going. And of course, in astronomical terms, when you think about deep time, then it's similar. So what we're looking at in the sky has come to us from a past, a distant time, right? The light has come to us from a distant point in the time. So then I think that the whole work then thinks about verticality of time, but it thinks about forms that are also, suggesting accretion, both of temporality and of material. I'm going to now also please do let me know if I'm going too fast, because I do tend to talk very fast when I get nervous. But in any case, powering through, we're coming to more recent work, which actually Rupali and Prasad have been around for the birth of. So I have been a huge fan for the longest time of science fiction and speculative fiction. And it's for many reasons. But I think one of the things that I have continued to be interested in beyond, when you're interested as a kid in, basic sci-fi or whatever, is that the speculative, horror, all of these things sort of thrive on the sense of the improbable, that moment where the unexpected comes in and forces you to pay attention. So turning something on its head and asking a very simple question: what if? So this question is at the heart of all sci-fi, right? It's at the heart of speculative fiction. And I found that the minute you ask this question, it automatically opens up many more complicated areas for all kinds of things. So when you think about human-planet relationships, if you think about AI, you think about gender, the question immediately seems to open up many, many different things. So the text that you're looking at on the screen is an author I discovered not very long ago, actually. And I found that his work suddenly spoke to a larger body of work that I was already interested in, which we'll come to in a minute. But this is a page from Annihilation, which is book one of a trilogy, which is called the Southern Reach Trilogy, 2014, which is basically this amazing, spectacular piece of eco-horror, where the natural world is both under threat and simultaneously threatening. And the plot begins as many in sci-fi. Those of you who are fans of science fiction, most of them begins with a first contact encounter, right? So the first time humans have encountered, let's say, alien life. Except that this encounter, I'm not going to do spoilers, but just briefly to say that this encounter is with an entire zone. The field in this case is an entire landscape, which he calls Area X. And the boundaries of this zone are marked not by a border, but by a shimmer, which keeps expanding, right? And this shimmer has a strangely, and we later discover horrifyingly refractive and prismatic effect on everything, including DNA, within its reach. And there is a wonderful article on horror writers and the climate, changing climate, by Naomi Booth. And I'm just going to quote a little bit from her because I just think it speaks to what we're going to talk about a little bit later. So I quote, "The first book of the trilogy, Annihilation, is narrated by a biologist on a mission to explore the area. She records her initial impressions of the abandoned landscape, including a low, powerful moaning audible at dusk. Her team discovers a structure in the earth an inverted tower. The biologist is lowered into it. There is a smell like rotting honey. The walls are covered with words, the writing system of some kind of fruiting body. She hears a heartbeat. The structure turns out to be a living organism, a horror show of beauty and biodiversity. The biologist leans in close and is sprayed with golden spores, infected. Annihilation raises the possibility that from this point on, everything we read is a hallucination produced by these spores, a fungal narration. The biologist's body begins to glow. No one returns from Area X. It is a place that colonizes minds and ingests bodies. So Vandermeer, whose text you're looking at on the screen, as I said, is at the forefront of this kind of writing that has been called eco-horror, the new weird, because ecology is weird, I think, and an awareness of what is happening maybe will require us to realize the extent of that weirdness that might actually be frightening. So he's also been, it's interesting because I feel like he's almost like a counterpoint to the Anthropocene, because it's actually very difficult to resist or to remove ourselves from this conversation, so how to not make it about us. But in fact, his books are sort of a way, or at least he offers a possible perspective of what the world might look like if the lines between us and nature were less clearly defined, and there's a lovely quote from his book where he talks about what if nature was in a constant state of camouflage, what if an organism looked out of another organism but didn't live there. So coming to the work, this is a series of 3 drawing and print based, they're sort of hybrid drawing print works. They were commissioned by the Rux Media Collective for a show in Spain in 2018. And it's a set of 3 symbionts. So genetic drift is the title, but the lower taxa, if you like, is symbiont. So, each of these genetic drifts, each of these symbionts has a very specific sort of taxonomy. So this one is made out of pitcher plants and flowering plants. But what you're looking at is basically a print which has been made in Photoshop out of drawings, scans of etchings, scans of other work, and a collection of photographs that I keep adding to because I'm obsessed with botanical gardens and nurseries. So I have a collection of plant images, strange plants, weird plants, and also images of plants that are available in the public domain. So what I do is I build an image in Photoshop. It's then, it's very high res and it can be printed to any scale. So in this case, I think this is at Project 88. So it was about 8 foot by 10 foot maybe. Once the work is glued onto the wall because it's a vinyl, I then make the edges vanish, right? So the idea being that I wanted to feel as though the drawing is coming out of the wall. So coming back to this idea of landscape looking back at you. So then what I do is that this kind of the idea of proliferation or contamination with the charcoal in the drawings, it takes a different shape here. So then the drawing, moves through the gallery or through whichever space it is. Here you can sort of see the edge of the vinyl. And then this is a really cool technique I found where basically you take a cloth and just thick acrylic paint. And if you put the cloth into the acrylic paint and you use it there, it starts to mimic this kind of, fungi patterning, which is a really, it's a nice sort of way of making it, become one with the wall. This is the third in the family. This one was shown at the Tycoon Museum in December of last year up until March this year. So as you can see, it really has a possibility of being able to grow and sort of, move through the space. So there's the main drawing, main vinyl, and then there are bits of vinyl. So there are, stickers of vinyls, which I cut out and then I paste and then I work on the wall directly with the drawing. So these are just different views of the same work. It had a really cool staircase that was going up. So it was nice because when you walk down, there were moments when it suddenly sort of came into view. This is a view from a different installation where, again, I was able to, use the architecture to sort of speak to it. And this is examples of the drawing on the wall. So we're going to shift now again. Hopefully no one is getting whiplash, but now we're shifting to a different kind of field. I mentioned in the beginning that I am both an artist and an amateur astronomer. The reason I have found that that's become an important thing to mention now is actually, the journey for both began at the same time. I joined the College of Art in my BFA, and the same year I joined College of Art, I also joined the Amateur Astronomers Association at the Nehru Planetarium in Delhi. So for a long time, it was just something I did every Sunday, meeting groups of amateurs on the roof of the planetarium over chai and samosas, star parties, meteor showers, that kind of thing. I won't go into the details of what happened, but basically for the past 12 years, though, this has become much more something that I'm exploring much deeper. This also began with a specific, event. It was a fellowship that was put forward by Sarai, which looked at the city of Delhi as a studio. So I was basically thinking about, why do these groups of people do what they do? What draws them to the night sky? So that project began in 2012. And what's happened is that this kind of, you've got a collective archive or a sort of a building chronicle of this group of people whose lives have been transformed by the night sky. And it has included interviews with astronomers, astrophysicists, obviously amateurs, but also visits to many observatories. I'm not going to show you images of all of them, but this one was quite extraordinary. This is the Indian Astronomical Observatory, IAO, in Hanle, which is one of the highest observatories in the world at an altitude of 14,500 feet. And it is a really, really extraordinary site. It's one of the highest sites for optical, infrared, and gamma ray telescopes. So the ones you're looking at on the screen collect gamma rays, which are one of the most enigmatic and energetic forms of light in the universe, which are produced by celestial events such as supernova explosion, the creation of black holes, and the decay of radioactive matter in space. But Hanle exists as also this kind of site of almost pilgrimage, because it's, of course, high above the dust. It has spectacular skies. Its landscape is almost otherworldly. And as of 2 years ago, Hanle has also been designated as India's first dark sky reserve, which I think is just incredible. And, I think the credit goes to all of the staff, of course, at IAO, but also the communities around, because the idea that one could be actually thinking about the dark sky as something to preserve, as something that should be thought about as a natural resource, is something that I think is very, very crucial. That's a whole other conversation, which we will not go into right now. But yeah, it's something that I'm very interested in and very close to, my heart. But anyway, I visited this site, this field, if you like, with Ajay Talwar, who is an amazing friend, colleague, collaborator, an amateur astronomer. And we went in 2010. And this was the first time I had sort of been to a site and was thinking about making work that was not print-based, that was not drawing-based, and that was not linked in a way with the kind of material you've already seen. So in a way, I was suddenly faced with the real world, for want of a better word, and I didn't actually know what to do with it. So what I did was I just shot video all over the observatory. I just collected as much material as I could. The work that actually emerged took a long time because I couldn't figure out how or what to do with it, right? And then I think I realized that the reason I couldn't figure out what to do with it is because it could not only be a video work. So finally, this was the piece that emerged. This is called Paths Unknown. And it is again, as I mentioned, it's a hybrid. It's like drawing and video. The work is always shown like this. What you're looking at is basically a quadrant of space, because I think what happened is I had collected these videos, but they didn't seem to make sense somehow. And when I plotted them against this star map, which is the Pleiades open star cluster, then suddenly it just made sense. And I hope, to me at least, right? So what happens is you kind of get this layering of, new terrains and fictions. You get new sorts of perspectives of this already very strange landscape, which then becomes even stranger with the, juxtaposition of this kind of star map. But I'm interested also in what happened with these machines, because you've got these instruments which seem to somehow be one thing standing in for something else, looking at something else again. And then they sort of are, they obviously are, man is implicated in every frame. Humans are implicated in every frame, but whether of deeds long past or present or in the future yet to come is still unclear. So they become almost chimeric. The videos themselves are very, very slow. All you see is light moving across the clouds, clouds moving across the landscape, sunlight shifting, or you see, raindrops falling on the screen. So this is just a close-up of the wall. This one, not me and the wall. This one was done over a period of, I think, 3 weeks. And it's usually, the materials I love always are charcoal, these amazing things called pan pastels, which are like, pastels which are basically put into these little cakes. It's like compact, but they're amazing. They're very nice, easy to work with. Dry pastel, glass markers, which are great, actually. Glass markers are amazing. And then, so this is just a detail of the drawing. And I also worked for the first time with like this gilt stuff, which was used to to polish frames, so gold and silver and bronze. And it was really interesting because suddenly it felt like this work, there was a real engagement or interaction between the video and the drawing in a way that was very interesting and very exciting. Moving to another field. This is a residency I did in 2018, and I spent 26 days on board this extraordinary ship. This was called the High Trust, and she was an oil tanker, and she was carrying 50,000 tons of jet fuel and diesel. And I boarded her in Fiji, and I went to Singapore via Samoa. And it was a residency that was a very interesting residency called the Owner's Cabin Residency. So the artist, they invite artists to come on board, and then you spend time on the ship. And it brought into focus something that I've been thinking about for a long time. This idea of, how do we construct the world around us, and how does that construction in turn shape us as well, and how does the environment in turn, shape us. But I did, that's fine. Sorry, I did many things while I was on board, which includes working in the engine room and working on copper. But one of the things that I did do is that I collected recordings of the sky, because May and June are Milky Way season in the southern hemisphere. And my voyage on the Pacific meant that every night the Milky Way arched overhead. And added to this is the fact that according to international shipping law, ships operate in complete darkness at night. So they only have a red light on the bridge, right? So the result is zero light pollution, horizon to horizon. And it's the best possible viewing conditions. And in fact, I've been to Hanle, which is one of the best places, and I've never seen the Milky Way, because everywhere I go, the clouds follow me. But this is the first time I was able to see the Milky Way. I did these are photographs that I took from the bridge every night. And I became really interested in this material that I was, collecting these kinds of recordings. And, I think a lot of my work is looking at the history of observation and the methods and the materials that have been used in the past and are being used now. And there's a really, really interesting historian of science whose work I've been looking at in particular. And his name is Omar Nassim, and he has a fantastic book which is called Observing by Hand, Sketching Nebulae in the 19th Century, which looks specifically into the relationship of observer, object, and the instrument that is used to record, which in the case of his book is the hand. So I'm just going to share one quote from his book, because I think it's really, it's amazing, and it also speaks to what I will share later. So observation is not about looking harder or more transparently. Neither is it only a matter of looking with the eyes alone. It is also a matter of recording, ordering, processing, and preparing. Certain practices of recording, namely sketching by hand, helped observers see more and differently. When we think about scientific observation, we must keep an eye on the hand. So these are some of my observations, some of my maps, if you like, some of the documents. They're sort of the first in a series of what I hope to do with those images. Because, of course, the development of photography has meant that astronomers, amateur astronomers, professional amateur alike, they don't always need to draw what they observe, right? But it does not mean that they no longer deal with images or image making. And for me, these observations are a way to sort of look deeper, but also maybe allow new vocabularies of mark making, maybe meaning, and they're marked, with signs, unclear coordinates, and they're sort of alternative maps of the sky as I saw them. And I'm working on a series of much larger ones for a show in September. And those have been also very interesting, just to see, how the drawings, the same. It's interesting, actually, this relationship between photography and drawing, at least also the way that I've seen. Of course, there's a long history, but I think in the ways in which it shifts. So when you take a photograph of something and then you draw it, and then you can, there's something interesting that happens, which is, So, coming now to the end, the last work I'd like to share, so that hopefully we have time for conversation. Apurva mentioned, I did a residency last year, a dual residency at CERN and at ICTS in Bengaluru, both of which are the most extraordinary spaces. And of course, it's very recent, so a lot of that research is still knocking around in my head, and it was very intense. But there's one work that has emerged out of at least the beginnings of that. And one of the things that I think maybe would be useful to bring to the conclusion of this kind of before we share the work is the idea that basically, as we've seen, or at least I have found, a field is many things, right? So when understood within the frame of sight, it's the observable world that you're looking out of your eyes at any one moment, right? At any given moment. But it is the area of inspection that is captured on a camera's imager. In astronomy, the field of view is usually expressed as the angular area of viewed by an instrument. So for instance, this image, which is the Hubble Ultra Deep Field, is constructed from a series of separate exposures taken by the Hubble Space Telescope between September 24, 2003 and Jan 16, 2004. So basically what that meant is that, sorry, going back to that image, I'm toggling between two screens, so things get a bit whatever. But this means essentially is that these observations are revealing the most distant stellar objects ever observed. The deeper the observation, the longer the exposure time, so deeper meaning longer exposure, the fainter the objects that become visible. But now when we come to quantum mechanics, then fields are very strange, right? Then fields become these kind of mysterious fluid-like substances, which are sometimes particles, sometimes waves. So then depending on the observer, a field can be sight, resolution, measurement, interaction, all at the same time. So, I mean, there were many, many incredible things about the time at CERN, but one of the things that was really amazing was their archive, and as I was talking about this very rich history of the beginning and the development of photography. So in the early part of the 20th century, a new frontier of photography was developed through experiments in particle physics and nuclear physics. So bubble chambers such as this one, Gargamel, which is now just a museum piece in their garden, could be used to record and investigate fast charged particles in very, very high resolution, spatial resolution. But one of the amazing things about CERN is that, of course, it's the largest lab on the planet, but it's also incredibly material, and they also work with more traditional photographic methods that we would recognize. So this is their emulsion scanning lab at CERN. So they actually have emulsions and photographic emulsions that are used in parts of some of the detectors. So this image it'll make sense to you in a second. So basically one of the works that has come out of this residency is this piece. The reason it's not, as you can see, it's not a straightforward drawing, but the work is hybrid. So this is a tapestry, but it involves a whole lot of drawing and photographs and scans of drawings. So this is part of a solo that, Apurva, again, very kindly mentioned in the beginning at the Minnesota Street Project Foundation in San Francisco. The solo is called 100,000 Suns, and it'll open in Mumbai in November. But the entire show, I won't tell you a lot about, only because it's not necessarily relevant here. But the show is about how have we observed our closest star, the sun, over a period of 120 years. So it looks at the many different registers that those observations have taken. It has a 4-channel film, but there was a new work that I did, which is basically a very large sort of tapestry-like installation of these fields. So the title of the work is Latent Fields, because it's basically putting together the two ideas, the idea of a deep field, like the Hubble Deep Field, but also this idea of the subatomic. So what I was really hoping for is kind of imagining a crossing through the body of a star. So you begin at the first field, which is this one, and you're in the center of the heart of the star, and then I've used images from the CERN archive. I've looked at, other things. I'll tell you what the actual material you're looking at in a minute. But as you go through the fields, so there are 7 of these fields, each is made up of 4 separate tapestries. Altogether, it's 10 feet by 8 feet. But as you move through the field, you kind of move from the subatomic to the atmospheric, from the center to the outermost edge, So I feel like the work sort of plays with materiality, with visibility, with scale. As I was saying, I'll tell you a little bit about what this, what you're looking at. Sorry, this is, let's maybe go back to this one. So I'll show you. So what I've done is, I didn't put those slides in because it would become like insane, 60 slides. But I have these little pieces of copper, just copper sheets, it's almost as thin as paper. You can buy it on Amazon because I think people use it for, I'm not sure what. But I bought a whole lot of these little sheets of copper paper, and then I basically drew on them with acid, with smoke, fumage. So, you smoke it, you burn it, you emboss it, you scratch it, you draw on it, and then I would scan all of those images in at very high resolution. And then I created these sort of, these 7 fields. And as I said, the idea being that the first field is the center of the heart of the star. And as you move to the back, you telescope outwards. And at the last field, which I think there is an image of here, but it's not very well. This is the back of the field. The last field is sort of, you've totally exploded out and you're in the middle of, the cosmos, if you like. yeah, that's just an installation view. And there are other, drawings as well in the show, but we don't need to go into all of them. And I'm going to stop here because I feel like I have talked a lot, but I would love questions, comments, anything at all would be great. Thank you guys so much for listening. Super.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rohini. My last question to you was going to be how was Sun? But you just answered that. I just wanted to say thank you once again because, you're the first speaker really of this entire series. And we arrived at calling it Drawing Worlds. And I personally feel that your work functions with that on so many levels because, on one level, it's about considering our world and our place and drawing it through that question. And on the other hand, it's also, it's completely cosmopoetic in that sense. It's concerned with questions of discovering things by making them and growing life forms, as it were, building systems for their generation, all of that. And it just reminds me, I'm going to bring up, it's the work of Roger Caillois, who is this French writer and thinker of the early 20th century. There's this book of his, it's called The Writing of Stones, and it looks at, he looks at these very highly polished cross sections of stones and minerals like jade and agate and onyx, etc., and he starts talking about them as landscapes or as dream stones or seeing monsters in them. And he's actually just thinking continuously about, how these stones, how they've impacted human imagination. But before that, there is this beautiful introduction to the book. It's written by Marguerite Yourcenar, where she says, and I'm going to quote directly over here, she says that one of the working hypotheses of modern science, that nature always acts with the greatest possible economy of means and towards the most practical of ends, finally came to appear unacceptable to Caillois. And he says that nature is not a miser. And he had become more aware of it as a mine of prodigality, a feast of superfluity, of the element of fantasy, the aesthetic factor, whether unconscious or otherwise, which is inherent in every scrap of matter, and of which man's own aesthetic may be no more than one of many manifestations, and one often distorted by our exaggerated awareness of it. So
I love that. I'm going to make you send me that. That is amazing.
I'll send you the book.
Please do.
Yeah, it's a PDF and it's freely available online as well. And I think I see that in, your work and your questions as well. And, when it comes to the fungi, these forms are exaggerated, but they're also quite visceral, they're suggesting bodies, but mutant bodies. And you have all these muscles and nerves, and they're all becoming new landscapes and also new spaces. And it's the beginning of this interrogation of interrogating existing bodies, existing space, existing inhabitations. And you mentioned the word dissonance, and I just wanted to bring up the question of dissonance, refamiliarizing yourself with something, making the familiar strange. Like, what do you think happens? Like, this is clearly important in your work, and what do you think happens when you're confronted with this discomfort actually?
Yeah, I will get it wrong because if I start looking for that quote, I won't find it. But there is an amazing quote by another historian of science of whom I'm a huge fan, Lorraine Daston. And she's written a lovely article which is called Wonder and the Ends of Inquiry, I think. But basically, she's talking about how, I mean, this is something I agree with her, the idea that wonder has kind of lost its teeth, that wonder, the way it used to be understood, had a lot more in common with horror and terror than we understand now, and the reason she goes on to share that, I really feel like I should quote her because I'm going to get it wrong. But anyway, the point is, I'll find the quote, but she basically says that all three of these are kind of passions that demand you to be in a state of you're active. You know what I mean? So for you to be able to recognize that something is wondrous, terrifying, or horrific, you have to know what the baseline is, and then you have to recognize that something is above that. Do you know what I mean? So what it does is it's also a state of where you are immediately thrown into a dual role of being both skeptic and believer. That moment of, am I really seeing this? And I think I'm interested in that space because I feel like I have a huge, like I'm really committed to making a case for wonder because I feel like the word has lost currency. I feel like if you just think about the way we're losing the stars in cities, the fact that you no longer look up and see stars, what would that do? I don't think it's not wonder in the way we understand. I'm not thinking of it in the sense of the sublime. I'm not thinking of it as something that It's not just beauty. It's about when it walks the line with the uncanny, it makes things possible because it forces you sometimes to look at things anew. And that's really the space I'm interested in. With the drawings, definitely, but also with, other work, but maybe more. It can be done more in different ways. Yeah, maybe not as directly. Drawings allow you to be really you can really, yeah. Also, there's something really interesting about that kind of horror, no, that kind of attractive, repulsive force, that I think is, yeah. I don't know if that answers the question. But anyway.
Yeah, because wonder sort of makes itself manifest just in a destabilizing when we try to teach, because the whole sense is that if you're, if you're in the question of if you want to imagine new spaces, then you first have to interrogate your existing spaces, and you do that by also interrogating your relationships and your the ideas that structure your world altogether. So the notions of family or the notions of bodies and behaviors, etc. So destabilizing, it becomes a very important and a very potent tool for you to confront the everyday, or confront like what you consider normal, I guess.
Exactly. And the destabilizing can even be really simple. It's like why I am so interested in the mirror, right? And in fact, one of the project title for the CERN residency was Through a Mirror Darkly. So the idea that, and I found out this, I've met this amazing theoretical physicist, David Tong in CERN, and I was interviewing him and we were having a conversation, and I should really find that quote. This is terrible. But basically he talks about how in quantum physics, in quantum mechanics, things are possible in the mirror that are not possible in the physical world, that there are certain particles that have a reverse charge, which you do not find in nature, but you can see them in a mirror. So of course, the mirror here means something slightly different, but I'm interested also in the idea of the mirror. So sometimes just the act of mirroring can make something very familiar, coming back to that question, something familiar, very strange, which is why even the word speculation, if you look at specular, it comes from, I think it's a glass. It references the mirror. So I like that also, that it references both telescope, magnifying glass, these kinds of things. Yes, but I agree. I think sometimes it's good to be a little bit off balance, makes things possible.
Yeah. No, but because you mentioned the mirror, my next question is, it's that of watching the watches in a sense, because a lot of your work is directed towards things that see. So, you ask, I know that, you've been interviewing astronomers as well, or you're taking photographs of observatories from, the act of looking itself is brought into question. And you're looking at this very, very essential act closely by looking at practices and devices and instruments that mediate looking or that embody looking. And so what is what is this new knowledge about looking, or how we see that comes up in your work?
Oh my God, that's a great question. I will not be able to answer that right now, but I love that. No, I think it comes down to, yeah, what drives that curiosity? I love that's a great question. I will not be able to answer you, but I think I am very interested in watching the watchers, also because I feel like I am both participant and observer in this case. So also that is an interesting kind of thing to sort of try and work with. But I think it speaks to basically what makes us human, no? Like what is it that how do we make sense of ourselves within all of this, and what does it make possible? And actually, I think the figure of the amateur astronomer is very interesting and very, I think for me, at least in my work, I found very important, because it also feels like it's going to sound, it's not like they make do with what they have, but yes, they make do with what they have. Do you know what I mean? So the act of looking is actually quite political. Who has access to the night sky? Who has access to observation time? The sky is actually being drawn into places. Who has the right to put things into the sky? Like 40,000 Starlink satellites go up without anybody getting a say. So amateur astronomers, whether it's somebody who has access to just a pair of binoculars, some of them have very high-tech equipment, but there's also something about this idea of, maybe I don't like the word citizen science, but there is something about being able to take ownership and saying, well, okay, I want to be able to image planetary objects from my balcony in Gurgaon, this is something, and it's like, you know what I mean? It's like trying to make sense of it, trying to say that I want to be able to contribute to this body of work, and I will do it with what I have and what I want to be able to do. Yeah. So I think it is, that still doesn't answer the question, but I will think about it because I love that. So yeah. looking.
Okay, and I also wanted to talk about, like, scales of seeing and distances of seeing. So, particularly from our positions, and you're looking from the cellular level to the cosmic level, and that's there in the title as well, from fungi, where, you're looming and you must look very, very closely at it, to the cosmic level, where you're, historically find yourself so tiny. So you're constantly concerned with placemaking for ourselves, working between the micro and the macro. And it actually, it reminds me of this film. It's by this Chilean director called Patricio
Oh,
Guzman,
yeah.
and it's called Nostalgia for the Light. Have you
Yes, of
seen
course. Yes, yes.
it? Yeah.
Of course I
Okay. Yeah, so for anyone who hasn't, like, it's one of favorite films of mine, and it looks at questions of the politics of memory, of the persistence of memory across time, how memory creates place for us, and it focuses on similarities between astronomers who are, looking at the stars, and the struggles of many Chilean women, particularly, who are looking for the remains of their dead relatives who were executed during the dictatorship of Pinochet. And the recurring images throughout the film are those that, bring together these different scales. So you'll see the surface of the moon, or these particles that are floating around a planet, I imagine, only for it to then become these dust motes that are just, hanging about the house, or the floor of the desert, or something, pitting something incredibly close against something extremely remote. So I'm just wondering, because you also work across these scales specifically. So if your work has unearthed or found patterns, or, like, connective tissue between these, in what the work is becoming.
Oh my God, I love this. You have to, I mean, this is so lovely. I feel like actually it's so dust, dust is such a big part of Nostalgia for the Light. And so the work that will be shown in Mumbai in November at the Bharaji Lad is this new film and one entire channel. So it's my first 4-channel film synced, and it's taken ages because, like, who knew? Choreography between 4 screens in sound and video is like, it's taken me forever, but I think I'm happy with how it's going. So essentially it was my visit to the Kodaikanal Solar Observatory during an eclipse. And, it was, Kodaikanal is the most extraordinary site in any case. It's the most amazing observatory because every day, weather permitting, since 1904, they have taken images of the sun. So we're talking about an archive which is 11 solar cycles, almost 120 years of solar observations. And the kinds of observations range from drawings on small discs of paper by anonymous observers, where they would track sunspots over weeks and months, to glass photographic plates, to, of course, more, they've got, very contemporary, H alpha and calcium K, yes, telescopes and, material. But the point being that I went there, I collected material during the eclipse. But one of the things that they have is this amazing solar tunnel telescope. So it's basically the body of the telescope sits, I mean, the top is the top. There are 3 huge coleostats, 3 mirrors that direct the sun down 3 stories. And then there's a 60-foot tunnel which directs the sun through. So I shot this material, a video of the eclipse through that, and it's just dust. It's just dust in the path of the eclipse, sun dust, if you like. But your question comes back to this idea that somehow the whole film is around, yes, the ways in which we have observed and recorded our star, but it's also thinking a little bit about the fact that, pushing against this idea that data, because of course it's about data that is held at the Kodaikanal archives. It's about my data because I have chased 4 eclipses. It's about my interviews. This work is almost like, I feel like it's bookending. It's bookended by 2 eclipses. It's bookended by a 2009 eclipse that began the project. It ended in 2019, not really ended. So it's a large chunk of research, but I forgot what I was saying. But the idea really being that pushing against the idea that data is somehow neutral, that data is sort of subjective, objective. It's not, because data is human, it's collaborative. And in this case, at least, data is very human, very material. So it's about people. It's about the voices of eclipse chasers who describe what it means to stand in the shadow of the moon. So it's coming back to this idea of, I use images of video that NASA makes available in the public domain, where you do the same telescoping. So you're looking at the surface of the sun, but it's overlaid with drawings of mine on copper, or it's got the voice of amateur astronomers who have chased eclipses. But I do think that what you're saying is a big part of the work. I don't think I have any answers. I think the interesting thing, or as with all artists or all practitioners, the work sort of helps you figure out the questions to begin with. You know what I mean? You begin with one question, but the work takes it in very different directions.
Yeah. And also because, if you consider drawing as a language, then a lot of your work is about forms of description and describing that go beyond the image, because the work is always collaborative. So whether it's in a space where you're using the curved wall, or whether it's like, with a film, or if it's interfering with objects, but the drawing is, generally like the genesis of it, so whether you're making it through your prints or Photoshop or computers, or you're drawing in a space. So I just wanted to ask you that for you, what does the drawing then engage? Like, what is the expanded drawing that gets produced? Is there an articulation that you have about how you draw? What is this new drawing? What is the territory of the new drawing? What does it set out to do?
Wow, I feel like I should have asked you for these questions before. Then I could have given you really like thought out answers. This is a great question. I think it's amazing. No, it's so interesting because it's very difficult to answer, because as I said, depending on where the drawing is and what it's doing, the answer is different. So let's say on the small copper pieces, it's a very different thing. I don't know if I can even articulate what it is. It became almost like a not deliberate, but I felt it necessary to have some sort of counterpoint to the film, because the film is very, it's very heavy on research. It's very heavy on video. It's all of those. It's research, it's theory, it's history, it's time. But I also wanted to do something that was a little bit more, not alchemical is the wrong word, but I've been trying to find a word that is like alchemy, but not alchemy, and I haven't been able to find it yet. But the idea is, like, why copper? So for instance, the reason I picked copper is that copper is one of the like all metals, we've inherited it from the hearts of supermassive, supernova, right? So the Earth has inherited its copper from the stars. So I love that kind of mirroring of materiality as well. So the fact that copper, literally when you burn it, it gets this sheen. When you buff it, when you polish it, it looks like the sun, but also it is off the sun. And then working on it, when I started, so these are just ideas, you just think, okay, we'll figure it, we'll try it. But then this idea that, okay, copper, when you put acid on, it goes blue, right? Or if you put harpic on it, it goes green, which is really cool, because then if you think about the history of drawing material, if you think about the history of blue, if you think about the history of malachite and all of these other things, then there's all other kinds of things that suddenly open up, and then also when you start to smoke copper, which is, I've done a series of my own personal eclipses. These are small little eclipses this big on copper plate, not sheets, where I've created films, what is it called? Sorry, plate of masks of the sun. And then I've smoked them upside down with the candle, so that it sort of like creates a reverse cloud image of the sun. What was the question? Yeah, but then when it comes to big work, like the last image that I showed you, because with latent fields, I showed some copper works, but I showed them against a drawing, so there the drawing sort of functions differently. Where the drawing is, I wouldn't say it's almost like it is, it's not quite a foil, but it becomes a moment where it is, then it's not, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like maybe what I'm trying to say is that now the new work that I'm doing are drawings of observations of the Milky Way. They're very large, they're on a black background, and I'm intending to show them against a large wall drawing of a scape, right? So then I don't know, like, is it going to be one work with the drawing and the print? So will it be separate? I think it's a great question, but it is really contingent on the drawing. So it's very difficult to, exactly.
Yeah, so I guess in that expanded sense of the drawing, we've been trying to look at through teaching drawing here as well, like many, many kinds of drawings beyond, like, okay, you tend to identify the drawing as a plan or as a section, but then when you're drawing differently, like, especially when you're conducting research, and we see this a lot in the fifth year when they're doing their thesis research. So, you start seeing drawings as narratives, or drawings as sensoriums, or drawings as, embodied processes, etc. So we're constantly in this search for these new articulations, new frontiers, new ways to talk about the drawing. And I think this is in some way connected to my, this next question that I have for you. I think you answered it in part. It's about speculation as a working method. And you said that science fiction, especially speculative fiction, is a large influence on your work. And the question is, it's there, it's inherent in your question, because you're setting out to make the discovery, etc. That's very much in the domain of the speculation, but it's very much embedded in your processes as well, because you're not ever relying on the traditions of the form like printmaking. Also, I have to ask, did you use Harpic on copper as a etching tool? Like, was that part of the oh wow, does it work?
No, so it's very cool. The thing that it does is it makes the most beautiful blue. It's insane. But it doesn't stay very long. But it makes them, no, wait a minute, sorry. It makes a green, my bad. There is another, what is it called? This tap scale remover. I don't know. It's basically much stronger in acid. So I think Harpic is alkali. Right? My daughter can correct me. I'm going to get it wrong. One is alkali, one is acid. So I was trying both. I feel like Harpic may not be an acid. Anyway, the tap scale remover stuff is an acid. And so I was spraying it onto the copper sheets, and it makes the most stunning blue. So it is etching into it, but I would just leave the acid there. So it would basically dry, and then it produces it basically foams and becomes these lovely blue. I wish I could show them to you now, but then that will become a bit much and go running and show you. But it's very cool. But I wanted to just coming back to what you said earlier, about this idea of the different ways in which drawing can also change. Like, it was a complete revelation to me when I read Omar Nasim's book, because what he tells you is that Herschel's drawings of nebulae, right? So what you see are the etchings, the engravings. But what he did was drawings. But he would say that he would create these kind of working skeletons. He called them working skeletons or scaffolds. And he would create and work on one drawing over maybe months. So there's this lovely phrase in his book where he talks about, like time is like, each drawing is like an accordion. Like time is stretched, time is thick on the surface. So even when you think about repetition, when you think about, trying to create familiarity with something that is so strange, so the idea of drawing a nebulae then, when you didn't have any frame of reference for it. So how do you create familiarity with something so strange? And he says it's through the act of repetition, that each drawer, each observer would have a different way of doing that, because everybody draws differently. So this act of, trying to draw the same object again and again. So it was repetition, observation. And I thought that was, it's amazing, because then when you start to think about anything as being not necessarily stuck in one moment, you know what I mean? Then, all drawing, I think, okay, all artists will build on a work. Not to say that, but there is something slightly different he's suggesting, right? That a single observation itself is also not so much a single observation, that it is actually of a duration. So when, like in the film, in 100,000 Suns, the second channel is about drawings of the sunspots on the sun's surface. So one observer chose to make a sunspot blue. Why choose blue? And just how, this act of familiarity through creating familiarity through repetition. Sorry, I just wanted to say that about what you said, but yes.
No, that was really, really beautiful, because, it's essentially like that whole act of being an artist is about developing a relationship with that process and developing it through.
And the object, depending on what you're looking at sometimes. So which I think is, And of course, everybody has their own, ways of doing this, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And building a relationship with process by, the redoing it again, but with like an iteration, and building a process through an iterative method. So I just the ending of that last question was how there is a leap and an invention in your processes as well, and so how is that reinvention or the play or the experiment, how it has become necessary to give a form to the work? But I think a part of it was answered when you spoke about in the previous question about drawing. But if you want to address it in any way, like, do you consider that also is process also a speculation along with the question?
Absolutely. 100%. Like, for instance, I because the last 3 years have been so focused on the sun and observations of the sun, I really wanted to make something that was off the sun, but I didn't want it to be a cyanotype. So then I was, but that is the classic, you know what I mean? Like, it is literally, it's a photographic paper and it's exposed to the sun. But I didn't know what I wanted, but I wanted it to be some kind of recording of the sun, drawing of the sun. So then I was just I was looking it up online. I was just doing some research, and fooling around, and then I found an experiment that you can do with I don't know if I should say it before I've even finished the work, but basically there are ways in which you can try and so let's just say that I think it's essential. I think the act of speculation within process is essential, especially when you feel something is not working, because then you can very easily fall back on, well, this is close enough or this is good. But if you have an idea of what you're hoping to do and it hasn't happened yet, then you have to keep speculating. You have to experiment. And very often there's so much that doesn't work. There's so much that you have to kind of abandon, but sometimes it does work. And like the work with the copper, it was just a test. It was just to see if it would even hold as a material, like with anything, actually, even with there's a body of work I have not shared, which is with the video feedback. So like I first started playing around with video feedback in 2006, and that's been something I'm still doing, because video feedback is an incredible medium. It's an incredible material, where it's about mirrors. It's about cameras looking at TVs with mirrors producing an iterated function system where you're creating generative fractals. Now I feel like I should show that, but anyway, it's not on this laptop. But no, speculation is essential, and it is tied into process, which actually I had not thought about. So thank you for that too, very much, Apurva.
Thank you, Rohini. I'm just going to ask if anyone in the audience, anyone watching, has any questions. Do you want to put them in the chat box or want to unmute? I can't tell. Joel, can you tell if anyone is raising their hands? Okay. No, that we have one from Neha Vadadi, who asks, do you think you'd ever want to work on something interactive? Something people can maybe walk through or get into?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm always up for that. Rather than just look at. I don't know if I would put it that way. I know what you're saying. Yeah, sure. I feel like there are definitely possibilities, but it would depend a lot on what it needed to be. Because there are some, for instance, I've seen some VR pieces or whatever, which are absolutely stunning, where the work needed the medium. You know what I mean? That is not always the case. So I also think that sometimes if the work requires it, I feel like I'm open to everything. But sometimes actually the work is precisely about the just looking, like a lot of my video work, for instance, are very slow, and they just ask you to stop and just look. So, but yes, I'm open to the idea of it if the work requires it.
Okay.
How do you
I think this is Milind. Okay, who is asking if he's hi, I was wondering, how do you hope viewers engage with and interpret your work?
I actually don't have any expectations of the viewers.
It's Maitri Relay, sorry.
Pardon? Yeah.
Sorry, it's an ex-student of ours. It's a student of ours, Maitri Relay.
Hi, Maitri. Thank you for the question. No, it's great. So what I do is I usually also write a piece of text that goes with every work. It helps me make sense of the work. It helps me make sense of, maybe the work that's to come. I always leave that text in the space, not sometimes on the wall, sometimes around. I hope that people will have, like, again, this question comes back a little bit to what Apurva asked with reference to drawing. What I work through with the work changes and depends on the work. So therefore, what I hope people will take away with the work will change. But to be honest, I really hope that I've left enough space, if that makes sense, in the work for people to be able to do what they want with it. So I don't really have any expectations. I will say, though, that with this work, 100,000 Suns, because it has required a choreography literally of text and image and sound, I am hoping that there is a specific I hope that there is a specific choreography that people leave with. It feels more like a play, almost like there are parts that I hope are speaking to each other, but beyond a point you can't really do that. But I think that's a great question, but it depends on the work. So yeah.
Thanks. Maitri Relay, your initials are MM on the screen. Any other questions from our usual suspects? Okay.
That could be either very good or very bad. I'm just going to go with very good, hopefully.
I'm going to go with very good as well.
Hello.
Wait, there's Prasad.
Hi. No, it's so wonderful listening and seeing actually. And I was remembering our conversations in Magba, no? It's kind of yeah. And really looking forward for the Bombay work because I think what I mean the last slide that you showed, I think the the whole aspect of long time. No, you said you called it deep time, the long time.
Deep time.
Yeah. So that aspect of uh, long time getting folded into the act of seeing, no, and the drawing of it. I think that those multiple um, screens and those multiple things will kind of will be able to hold it because that's been a struggle. How do you kind of hold time in the act of seeing and drawing? No, so that's the and I think that many sons. I think it's a great. It's really looking forward for it. That's all. I mean, I just wanted to say hi.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, no, I love that though. Holding time in the act of seeing. Yeah.
Hi. Hi,
Hello.
Rohini. Hi. That was lovely. Really, really lovely. And I was just thinking of what you said about like making your mini eclipses, right? Um and in some ways I'm also thinking of, maybe extending some of this question here about the interactive, because a lot of your work is really kind of about going on voyages, and the field is this kind of extended field, working with amateur astronomers and others. So I'm just kind of wondering if, for you, like, what would your ideal gallery be?
Oh my God.
Like, what does it mean to? I mean, what does it mean to really kind of engage with this, like making multiple, many people making those eclipses together? What is this kind of world making? Because it's about world making, right? And I think that's what's fantastic about the work that you do. There is a kind of a world making where you're bringing an astronomical time, to the everyday. So I'm just wondering if, and I mean, you worked with the Baudaji Lad, where you worked with, the idea of an extended history, the archive. So I'm just wondering what that would be, what would that next gallery be for you?
That is a great question. I don't even know if the gallery is the right place at all, So I think you guys were also part of the 5 million incidents, right? Or not?
Yes. Yeah.
As part of that, I had curated with, again, an amateur astronomer, this observation. We had done something at an observatory in Alwar, which is about 4 hours away from Delhi. And I had taken a group of people that was a mix of people who had never looked through a telescope and people who'd had experience looking through a telescope. So the idea was to observe the act of observation. So what does it mean to really think about observing observation? And it was 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And Ajay had planned the entire thing. And it was extraordinary because that one event, that one incident, if you liked, has spawned, that is not the right metaphor, has become a constellation of many other things. Spawning is not right in this context. No. So, what happened is that event happened. Then after that, other participants who were there sent me text. Then I wrote a text. Then that became a performative essay with this amazing sound artist, Legion 7. Then we created a performance. Then we created a website, where the work has now become about the ambiguity of sight. How strange it is, how bizarre it is, how the history of observation is more complicated than we recognize. And then we invited more collaborators to complicate that even more. So what happens when you take somebody else's observation and then riff on that? So yeah, I don't know if I feel like it's important to do these other things, which sort of then, and not all of them find space in the same place, So there is space for all of it, but not everything can, I think, fit in everywhere. Yeah, but I think it's a very good question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's really the deep seeing, right? Like exactly. The deep seeing where you're seeing together with many people, and it's not like it's not a moment in time, but it's this kind of, multiple seeing. So I think that's really kind of looking forward to engaging with you more in this. Yeah. So thanks so much.
No, my pleasure. Next time we'll do one on deep time.
Let's do that. We would love to invite you to the school, and maybe we do like a workshop or, deep seeing. So Apurva, we have to remember this.
Done.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much.
Great.
This was
Super.
a blast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think we have any other questions at the moment, but Rohini, thank you so much. It was so wonderful to have you flag off the series for us also. Please come to Mumbai. I'm guessing you will come to Mumbai soon because of the show in November. We're very excited. Please come visit the school as well. And yeah, that's it. I'd like to also tell everyone that the conversation series is fortnightly, and we're meeting again on the 19th of July, and we'll be in conversation with Afra Shafiq. So please join in for that as well. But thanks, Rohini. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye. Joel, I think you can end the meeting also.
Yeah.